What else are you hearing from the palace tonight about Princess Catherine's condition? Not to mention the timing of this.
No press conference, no cameras, no warning at all. Just a handful of words released to a small circle of trusted correspondents, and within seconds, the entire tone of this story flipped. Before I tell you exactly what that statement said, and before I walk you through the palace tension, the internal disagreement, and the one decision that reportedly split the people closest to Catherine right down the middle, hit subscribe, because the real story isn't the statement itself. It's everything that had to happen behind closed doors just to make 12 words possible. Stay to the end, because there's a detail about the following morning that almost nobody outside that household knew about until now. Here's what actually went out. According to people said to be close to the medical side of this, the message confirms something many had quietly hoped for but almost nobody expected to hear so plainly, that Catherine's treatment was, in language reportedly used directly by her team, progressing better than anticipated. No diagnosis specifics, no timeline, just enough to shift an entire nation from anxious silence to cautious relief in under a minute. 7 minutes, that's the window everyone's talking about. But to understand why those 7 minutes carried so much weight, you have to go back to where this whole thing started, months earlier, in a house where nobody outside 5 people knew anything was wrong yet. The earliest sign wasn't dramatic. It was almost invisible, a routine appointment that ran unusually long. A second appointment added without explanation. A close aide reportedly noticed Catherine's schedule shifting before she said a single word about why. 2 engagements quietly moved, a third cancelled entirely, no reason given, none requested. Catherine insisted on telling William in person. The setting was ordinary, an evening at home, children asleep, no staff in the house. What was said in that room has never been reported and likely never will be. But within days, according to people who worked near him, William changed, quieter, not withdrawn, distracted in a specific way, like someone working through a problem that refused to resolve. Deciding how to tell the children reportedly took even longer than telling each other. Nearly 2 weeks debating timing, Georgia's school term, Charlotte's sensitivity to sudden change, the real risk that Louis, still young enough to repeat things without understanding them, might hear a distorted version from someone outside the family first. In the end, all 3 children were told together on a weekend at home. No formal record, no witnesses beyond the 5 of them, truth scaled to each child's age, reassurance without false promises, an open door for questions whether they came that day or weeks later. Catherine kept as much of ordinary life intact as she could. School runs continued. Homework got checked every night. Bedtime stories didn't stop. One person close to the household called it entirely deliberate, giving her children continuity in the one area of their lives still fully within her control. But while all of this stayed private, the public wasn't staying quiet. Every cancelled engagement, every unexplained schedule change fed a growing wave of online speculation. Some of it harmless, much of it wasn't. Forums and speculative accounts multiplied fast, filling the silence with theories, several of which allegedly caused real distress inside the household once the family saw them. This stretch is remembered internally as one of the hardest of the entire ordeal because of the gap between what the family privately knew and what the public was left to assume. Each day of silence generated more theories, not fewer. In earlier decades, a family could decline comment and watch a story lose momentum. Now, silence itself becomes content, endlessly dissected, until saying something starts to feel less like a choice and more like an inevitability. That's exactly why Catherine's insistence on writing her own words instead of accepting language handed to her by the communications team matters so much. She'd had enough of other people's version of her story being the only version out there. William's behavior during this stretch tells its own story. Multiple accounts suggest he quietly scaled back his official schedule far more than the public record showed, not through any announcement, but through subtle rescheduling and stretches where his calendar simply had less in it. One aide described him as present in a way colleagues hadn't seen before. Here's a small detail that keeps surfacing. William reportedly began doing school drop-offs himself on mornings that job would normally have gone to someone else. Nothing announced. Just a father showing up somewhere a driver usually would have been. Even with all that discipline, the strain showed. During one public engagement, William reportedly paused mid-conversation, visibly distracted, before recovering. Only later did that small pause take on new meaning. Now here's where the real tension starts, because not everyone inside the palace wanted this handled quietly. According to people reportedly familiar with internal discussions, a faction within the communications team pushed, gently but persistently, for a far more visible approach. Not cynical, about reassurance, about giving an anxious public something solid before rumor filled the space entirely. It touched something deeper, the long-running tension between what an institution believes it needs and what a family actually needs while living through something hard. This disagreement reportedly unfolded across weeks of meetings, not one confrontation. Early on, even aides who initially favored a fuller statement came around, not because they were argued into it, but because, as one account puts it, it becomes difficult to keep arguing with someone about how to manage their own diagnosis before you start to feel like you're arguing about the wrong thing entirely. Not everyone came around. At least one senior figure reportedly remained unconvinced right up until the final statement went out, genuinely worried about public confidence, not personal friction. And here's something that rarely gets mentioned. Any statement involving a working royal's health has to clear legal, medical, and communications review before release, no matter how brief the final wording is. Those 12 words were reportedly drafted, reviewed, and quietly debated for the better part of a week before anyone outside a small circle ever saw them. Queen Camilla, according to people familiar with the household, took a deliberately hands-off position, deferring completely to Catherine and William's judgment. Princess Anne quietly picked up additional engagements as William's diary grew lighter. No announcement, just instinct after decades of service. Now the detail that changes everything about how you should read that 7-minute window. According to multiple sources, a fuller statement, several paragraphs, some general characterization of Catherine's treatment had actually been drafted, cleared by legal and medical teams, and brought close to release before being pulled at the very last moment. The reason came down to one conversation between Catherine and William the night before, in which she reportedly said she simply wasn't ready, not for any reason she could fully explain. Just an instinct she trusted enough to act on. That reversal caused real frustration inside the communications office, not because anyone questioned her right to make that call, but because of the mess it created. One aide reportedly spent an entire weekend fielding questions from journalists who'd sensed something was coming, buying time that stretched into months. Sources suggest this happened at least twice before over the preceding months, each time a fuller version drafted, each time quietly declined. Then came the final point. According to someone described only as close to the process, papers were laid out on a table one more time, proposed language for a fuller announcement, and Catherine reportedly pushed them gently aside without reading past the first paragraph. No explanation, just a decision and a silence that followed it. William stepped in, not to override her, but to relay it. He told the room calmly that they'd go with something shorter. Nobody pushed back after that. What reached the public was the short version, 12 words, reviewed, revised, and personally approved by Catherine before release. No formal briefing, no scheduled appearance, just a quiet release to a small pool of correspondents. At a moment almost nobody was expecting it. Within minutes it reached newsrooms worldwide. One correspondent later described it as the kind of update you almost don't believe until it's been confirmed a second time. A second correspondent in that same newsroom reportedly called a colleague who'd covered this family for over a decade, just to ask whether the wording meant what it seemed to mean. The answer took several seconds to arrive, not because it was unclear, but because of how long that colleague had privately been waiting to finally say yes. Outside Windsor, a small crowd gathered for a completely unrelated reason reportedly started checking their phones almost in unison. One bystander, just walking her dog near the grounds, found herself standing in a spontaneous gathering of strangers, all reading the same 3 sentences, several visibly emotional. She said it felt strange to cry over a stranger's health update and then immediately understood exactly why everyone around her was doing the same thing. Similar scenes reportedly played out with no connection to the royal family at all. A pub in the north of England where the news interrupted a football match. A market vendor pausing mid-sale to read the headline aloud. None of it coordinated, none of it expected. But together, these moments showed just how much quiet, personal investment the public had built up over months of uncertainty. International outlets picked the story up within the hour, several networks breaking into scheduled programming, a level of attention media analysts say is typically reserved only for the most significant royal announcements. Social media moved even faster. Within the first half hour, the statement had become one of the most discussed topics in the country, reaction ranging from relief to skepticism to speculation about details the statement never actually provided. Inside the household, the mood reportedly shifted in a way multiple sources describe as almost physical, months of tension finally breaking. One aide later called it the first time in a long while the house felt like it could exhale. Here's the moment that stuck with people. Charlotte, apparently having overheard adults discussing the statement, reportedly asked her mother directly whether this meant she was all better now. Catherine's response was careful, warm, and reportedly not a simple yes, honest enough to be trusted, gentle enough not to overwhelm. George reacted with quiet relief rather than celebration, consistent with a pattern that's been visible since the beginning. Louis reportedly just wanted to know whether this meant more time in the chair beside his mother or less. The answer he's said to have received was more, for now just a different kind. That evening, the family reportedly did something almost defiantly ordinary. They ate dinner together, all 5 of them, at the kitchen table, no staff present. Several people close to the family have pointed to it specifically as representative of something bigger, a family that, even at one of the more significant moments in its recent history, chose to mark it not with ceremony, but with the single most basic unit of family life there is. William reportedly spent part of that evening on the phone with his father, King Charles, relaying the day's developments. What was actually said has never been reported, but sources close to the household suggest the call was brief and warm, a father and son each navigating their own version of the same fundamental uncertainty at different points in their lives, inside the very same institution. And now, the detail I promised you at the start. The following morning, Catherine reportedly went for a walk on the Windsor grounds, not formal, not photographed. Apparently the first walk of its kind in some time without the specific caution that had characterized her movements for most of the preceding year. It's been repeated often enough by enough independent sources that it's become part of the story around this update, a small human image of a woman reportedly beginning to reclaim pieces of ordinary life that had quietly been set aside for far too long. For a family that spent the better part of 2 years balancing privacy against public duty, this moment represented something bigger than a routine health update. It was, by several interpretations, a rare instance of the institution stepping back entirely and letting a mother tell her own story, on her own terms, in her own time. Some commentators suggest this episode may quietly reshape how the institution handles future health matters, prioritizing individual pacing over immediate disclosure. Others caution every situation is different. Neither view is confirmed. Millions of people who have never met Catherine and likely never will spent months genuinely worried on her behalf, then genuinely relieved for her, based on nothing more than a handful of careful statements. Catherine has been a public figure for close to 2 decades, long enough that an entire generation has grown up alongside her. That familiarity explains why a single 12-word update generated this scale of reaction. In the weeks since, the family's public schedule has reportedly begun shifting again, not dramatically, not all once. A handful of engagements quietly reintroduced, approached with the same careful calibration that governed everything from the initial disclosure to the final 12 words. Nothing rushed, nothing performed. What stays consistent across nearly every account of this period is a family that reportedly chose closeness over performance, again and again, even as the institutional machinery around them pushed towards something more visible, more managed, more public. But for Catherine, for William, and for 3 children who reportedly just wanted their mother back, the 7 minutes that changed the tone of this entire story were never really about the statement itself. They were about everything that led up to it, the quiet mornings at Windsor, papers pushed gently aside on a table not once but 3 times before a 4th and final attempt finally became the version the world would see. In an institution built almost entirely around image and carefully managed statements, this particular story unfolded in the opposite direction, private first, public only once it was ready to be public, not manufactured into existence, simply allowed to exist and eventually shared. If stories like this matter to you, the human moments hiding behind the headlines, the parts of this family's life that never fit neatly into any official statement, make sure you're subscribed. There's a lot more of this family's story still unfolding, and this particular chapter is far from the last word.